Okay, it is 7 o'clock and we are ready to get started. Are both my speakers ready? Alana and Cayla, perfect. So while people are still joining in, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping items. So this is our April edition of Wednesday Wellness. We have video and audio turned off for all participants just to make it a little bit easier for the speakers. Our providers will answer questions following their presentation. So please type your questions in the Q&A feature, which is at the bottom of your Zoom window. And you should see 2 speech bubbles with Q&A. In the coming days, you'll receive an email containing tonight's presentation slides, as well as a link to the recording. So tonight's presentation is being recorded. And the email will also include additional resources discussed this evening and contact information for our behavioral health providers. So with that, let's move on to this evening's presentation. So our topic this evening is Women and the Stress Cycle, Navigating Stress in a Changing World. And we have 2 speakers for this evening, Cayla Yuhn, who is a behavioral health therapist at St. Joe's Outpatient Psychiatry and Counseling Center in Livonia, where she provides both long and short-term therapy to individuals and families. She lives in the Metro Detroit area with her partner, and in her free time, she enjoys cooking, reading, exercising, and spending time with her dog, Grant. Our other speaker is Elana Greenberg. She is a behavioral health specialist at IHA Primary Care in Milan, where she's been practicing for 4 years. She lives in the Ann Arbor area with her family and enjoys spending time outdoors with her 2 dogs, Max and Ella. She also practices vinyasa yoga and she likes to travel. So with that, take it away.
Okay, so I had to admit, when I first was asked to give this presentation, I felt a little stressed. Public speaking is a stressor I try to avoid at all costs, but it was also an opportunity to share some tips and tools on reducing stress during these extremely difficult times where there's lots of change and uncertainty. These past 2 years, we have faced multiple stressors. I will often tell patients that our brains are designed to handle 1 or 2 stressors at a time. They weren't designed to manage the barrage of stressors we've had to endure the last couple of years. Just like a bucket of water, if you keep filling it up, eventually it will spill over. Our buckets are spilling out. This has been especially true for women. So what is stress anyway? So really, it can create feelings of emotional and physical tension, and we'll talk about how this affects our bodies later. It can also originate from either internal or external stressors. So some common internal stressors we may all face are negative self-talk, unrealistic expectations of ourselves, and feeling that one needs to be perfect. External stressors are the events, including pressures in our lives, such as divorce, marriage, children, work, and money. And right now, in addition to that, we've been dealing with this pandemic for a couple of years, and climate change, a war in the Ukraine, you name it, it seems to just keep adding up. And then of course, the technology issues with Zoom. So for women, juggling job pressures, family schedules, money issues, career and educational advancement, and child and elder care concerns are just a few of the many stressors that women are facing. The experience of stress is how you respond to the stressors. So stress and stressors are different things. Therefore, one person's stressor can be another person's motivator. Interestingly, when we were evolving, we were more likely to be killed by our stressors. Today, it is our stress that is killing us. Stress can also result in feelings of frustration, anger, and nervousness. People often describe feeling overwhelmed. Acute stress or short-term stress usually goes away quickly. Medium levels of stress can enhance motivation. For example, having a deadline for a project at work may increase our focus. It also kicks our body into gear to protect us. We're happy that our brain tells our leg muscles to press on the brakes when there's a car that slams its brakes in front of us. However, if left unchecked, it can become chronic and lead to multiple emotional and physical problems that Cayla will discuss later. We're here to discuss women and stress, specifically how it affects women differently than men. For one, women tend to perform more unpaid domestic labor. A New York Times article from March 2020 claimed that if American women earned a minimum wage for the unpaid work they did around the house and caring for relatives, they would have made 1.5 trillion in 2019. Women perform an average of 4 hours of unpaid work compared to men's 2.5 hours. There's also a thing called mental labor, which is the unpaid, invisible work that women often do the majority of in their households. This can be, these are things to make everyone feel comfortable and happy. Some examples are keeping mental to-do lists, making sure your kids have enough snacks and are wearing the right clothes, making sure you send out those holiday cards, and maybe remembering your in-laws' birthdays. Women also tend to assume multiple roles, such as having full-time jobs and taking on the caregiving roles. Women also spend much more time taking care of others than themselves. According to the Census Bureau, when the pandemic erupted in the spring of 2020, roughly 3.5 million mothers with school-aged children either lost jobs, took leaves of absence, or left the labor market altogether.
Okay, so to continue on to the point that Elana was just making, aside from all of our lived experiences, there's also some documented evidence that women and men experience stress differently and cope with stress differently. So we've gathered a couple of relevant statistics to highlight the importance of the conversation we're having today. So to start, in a study published by the American Psychological Association titled Stress in America, Gender and Stress, women are more likely than men to report having a great deal of stress and are more likely to report those physical and emotional symptoms of stress, such as having a headache, having felt as though they could cry, or having had an upset stomach or indigestion. And so while these statistics are relevant to our discussion today, it's of notable mention that we are only just now starting to learn about the way stress impacts women differently. And much of this information we have today has surfaced in light of the pandemic, as Elana was just discussing. Next slide. So to further our point about why it's so important to be addressing our stress or having this conversation, chronic stress can seriously impact our physical and emotional health. So if this is going on and we neglect it, it will eventually have an impact on our quality of life. So an overexposure to stress hormones that are commonly known as cortisol and adrenaline, they impact our health and functioning in some of these ways. Specific to women during our pregnancy, studies have shown that the effects of chronic stress can extend beyond an individual. So these hormones play an important role in brain development. Some studies with animal models have actually shown that mothers with high blood levels of cortisol during pregnancy often have babies with lower birth weights, developmental delays, and more sensitive stress responses throughout their lives. Overexposure to these stress hormones can also affect our own brain functioning. So persistently high levels of cortisol inhibit neuron growth inside the hippocampus, impairing the normal processes of memory function and recall. So stress hormones can also suppress neural pathways that are normally active in decision-making and cognition. It can also have an impact on our physical health, so which can cause stress can cause weight gain, either through direct mechanisms such as eating more, which we like to call stress eating or comfort eating. We hear that commonly, or indirectly due to decreased sleep, which therefore we have less energy to exercise. It affects our sleep due to having high levels of these hormones prolongs how long it takes us to fall asleep. So sleep loss then triggers our body's stress response system, leading to an elevation in stress hormones, which further disrupts sleep, resulting in that vicious cycle. Chronic sleep deprivation has also been associated with decreased metabolism, which can also lead to weight gain and can also cause endocrine dysfunction. And so on the other side of the slide here, you see a list of these coping strategies that we often engage in to relieve ourselves of this discomfort. Our instinct tells us to find relief when we're feeling uncomfortable. And so, chronic stress can be so draining, both physically and emotionally. We want to seek comfort and pleasure in activities that will give us immediate relief. So it's not uncommon for folks to turn to activities such as drinking alcohol too much or too often, gambling, overeating, or developing an eating disorder, participating compulsively in sex shopping or internet browsing, smoking, and maybe drug use. And so what we find is that through engaging in these activities, while it may provide immediate relief, we actually end up with additional social and emotional stressors. So maybe some more financial stress, some relationship stress, and maybe some additional health concerns as well. Next slide. So we want to give you a sense for what's happening in the brain when we're experiencing this stress response. So most, if not all of us, are familiar with those initial physical signals of stress. So we're breathing faster, our heart rate has increased, and we have some muscle tension, maybe in our neck or shoulders. So to further understand what causes those physical symptoms, we are going to outline what's happening in our brain when we encounter a stressor. So first, what happens is that the amygdala jumps into action. So when we confront danger, our eyes and ears send information to the amygdala, the area of the brain that contributes to emotional processing. The amygdala interprets the images and sounds and sends a distress signal to the hypothalamus. So next, the hypothalamus reacts to the signal sent from the amygdala and acts as a command center. So this area of the brain communicates with the rest of the body through the nervous system so that we have enough energy to fight or flee. And the automatic nervous system controls all those involuntary body functions like breathing, blood pressure, heartbeat, the dilation or constriction of blood vessels, and small airways in the lungs. So, we obviously, when we're confronted with a stressor, don't have time to think about doing those things. So our body is able to just do it for us automatically to make sure we can spring into action. So this is what's causing those initial physical symptoms that we all experience at some point. And we're going to talk about more about the nervous system on the next slide. So the stress response that we experience is immediate, but there's so much happening behind the scenes to prepare our body to handle this stress accordingly. So the stress response weaves together three of the brain's parallel communication systems, coordinating the activity of voluntary and involuntary nervous systems, muscles, and metabolism to achieve one defensive goal. So first, the voluntary nervous system does the job of priming our body to fight or run from danger, which is also commonly known as the fight or flight response, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. Next, the involuntary nervous system redirects nutrients and oxygen to the muscles. And this, the automatic nervous system has two components. So the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system functions like a gas pedal in a car. It's triggering the fight or flight response, which provides our body with a burst of energy that it needs to respond to the perceived danger. The parasympathetic nervous system acts like a brake in the car, which promotes the rest and digest response that calms the body down after the danger has passed. And of course, all the while, a hormonal response is also occurring. So a cascade of neuroendocrine hormones originating in the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary circulates in the bloodstream, affecting processes like metabolic rate, sexual function, and telling the adrenal cortex to release glucocorticoid hormones, also known as cortisol, into the blood. These hormones prepare our body to respond to a potential threat. The hormones make energy available to muscles and ramp up attention and learning. They help inhibit non-essential functions like growth and immune responses until our crisis ends. So a stereotypical physical reaction to stress may have helped our ancestors run from predators, but any stressful situation we encounter in our current lives, arguing with our partners, a blind date, a looming deadline at work, abdominal cramps, discovering that your apartment has been broken into, maybe even trying karaoke for the first time if you're that daring, has the potential to set off this stress response. So our bodies turn it on to some degree in response to any external or internal threat to the status quo or homeostasis. Next slide. All right, so as we've discussed, our brain is working very hard to prepare our body to deal with a stressor, but that obviously does not come without a cost. Our body eventually reaches a state of exhaustion or burnout, and as a result, we may experience physical and emotional symptoms. So some common physical symptoms that we hear from people: aches and pains, just all throughout our bodies, chest pain, racing heart, exhaustion or trouble sleeping, headaches, very common, high blood pressure, muscle tension and jaw clenching, digestive problems, decreased libido, weakened immune system. And some common emotional symptoms are depression, anxiety and panic attacks, irritability, sadness, poor concentration, and excessive worry. So if we pay attention, these symptoms can actually function as warning signs or red flags, which can tell us to get some help or take a break. So later on in the presentation, we will discuss some effective strategies for coping with stress if you notice that some of these things are happening.
So here is a picture of what the stress cycle might look like. So when we're faced with stressors, our insides work really hard to keep our outsides alive. This takes a lot of energy, and therefore everything we don't need gets shut down, including our digestive tract and our reproductive system, which is why we can feel pretty uncomfortable. Instead, our energy just goes into keeping us alive. In the stress cycle, there is an event or an anticipation of an event that gets our body into action, or in some cases, inaction. This is a fight, flight, or freeze response, as Cayla explained earlier. In the example above, the tiger is the stressor that sets the cycle into motion. Our brain sends the appropriate signals to our bodies to take action. In the case of a tiger chasing you, you would probably try to run to safety. Unfortunately, our body goes through the same cycle as Cayla discussed earlier, whether it's a tiger chasing us, which is unlikely to happen these days, or receiving an email from our boss about a project that needs to be done the next day. Our brain just doesn't differentiate. Also, interestingly, after we've escaped the stressor, the stress often remains, or something else triggers the cycle to start all over again. As explained in their book, Burnout, Emily and Amelia Nagoski explains that our brains know we're safe by the actions we take. It's not just, in the example above, it's not just getting to safety, but it's the running that actually helps complete the stress cycle. Although fight or flight may be the main physiological response to stress for both males and females, behaviorally, females' responses are marked by a pattern of tend and befriend, according to a 2000 APA study. This is to make sure children are safe and then network with other women in stressful times. The good news is that there are many ways to complete the stress cycle. Some of these techniques are outlined in Burnout. I will review 7 of these today. These are a mix of things you can do in the moment of experiencing the stressor and those you can practice regularly to manage overall stress levels. The first and most effective way is physical activity. This doesn't have to be a long workout at the gym or running on the treadmill for hours, however. It can be doing jumping jacks, taking a walk, dancing to your favorite music in your living room, doing yoga, tightening and releasing your muscles. Sleep, as Cayla discussed earlier, stress actually can impact sleep in a bad way, but we actually also need sleep to help us be more resilient to stress. And we need about 7 to 9 hours of sleep each night. Things like having a regular bedtime, avoiding screen time, and making sure your bedroom is quiet and comfortable can all help encourage a better night's sleep. However, sometimes professional help is needed, and you should talk to your doctor about other treatment options. Crying, although it doesn't come easily to everyone, it's really effective at stopping the stress cycle in the moment. The key is to focus on the physical aspects of crying and try not to feed the crying with more negative thoughts. And sorry about the barking. Laughter is really effective. However, it has to be authentic. Watching a funny video or a comedy routine can do the trick. I really like the next one, which is creative self-expression, because there's like literally so many different ways to experience this. This could be journaling, drawing, performing, knitting, whatever you like to do, however you like to create things, gardening. And so anytime you're creating something, it helps complete the stress cycle. Connection is really important for human beings. We have a biological drive to feel connected, but there's different ways to feel connected. It can be getting a hug from your partner, snuggling with your cat or dog, walking through the woods, or a spiritual connection, like feeling connected to something bigger than us. Personal connection is often a big part of female stress management. According to the APA, this ability to connect with others may be the reason why women are more likely to take charge of their stress and manage it. Also, estrogen may enhance oxytocin release, while testosterone may diminish it. This may be one reason that women seem to seek social support more often than men when under stress. However, women have also been socialized from an early age to look to their social group, particularly their female friends, for support when under stress. The last one I'll talk about is breathing. When you're stressed or worried, the muscles that make you breathe tighten. This makes you breathe faster than normal. You may feel like you're not getting enough air. There are many different techniques for the relaxation to allow for the relaxation response. Cayla will talk about some of these techniques next when she talks about mindfulness.
Okay, so we wanted to take some time to talk about mindfulness because it has become a hot topic in mental health and somewhat of a buzzword that is somewhat misunderstood. So we wanted to spend some time kind of like demystifying this concept and give you some practical tips to take away that you can use to manage stress. So here at the top, we have the definition of mindfulness taken from mindful.org, which is actually a really helpful website in mindfulness practices and learning about how to help use it to manage stress. Mindfulness is the basic human ability to be fully present, aware of where we are and what we're doing, and not overly reactive or overwhelmed by what's going on around us. So mindfulness is all about making the mind-body connection in the here and now, which, when we're worried or stressed, thinking about things that are going to happen, have already happened, might happen, it's pretty difficult to do that. So it takes a lot of intention, but it is not impossible to learn. I've actually had the privilege of not only practicing mindfulness myself and experiencing the benefits, but also working with people in my practice that have really benefited from it as well. So some facts about mindfulness: anyone can do it, and it's easy to learn, despite what you may have heard. It is actually an easy way of living, easier than what we're used to, and it minimizes needless stress. It is also evidence-based. It's been researched and studied, and science shows that mindfulness has a positive impact on our health, happiness, work, and relationships. So this seems pretty self-explanatory, but it is easier said than done. So because of our past our fast-paced and demanding society, we are often on autopilot, trying to multitask and get as much done as possible as quickly as possible. And while it may be an effective and useful tool in some situations, overall behaving in this way usually causes us to be distracted and checked out. So if this is our status quo, we might not even be aware of just how stressful something has been for us. It might even lack the awareness of what it is that might be causing that headache that we've had on and off for the last 3 days, or why we're feeling anxious. So over here on the side of the page, we have a list of things that maybe we can pay attention to. These would be signals that we could benefit from being more mindful. These are so already mentioned, but oftentimes we hear people saying, I've been feeling down and I don't know why. So I have this sadness or this anxiety or this frustration that is persistent, but I'm not really sure where it's coming from. I'm constantly overthinking. So thinking about things that have already happened or things that might happen or are going to happen, never really focused in the present moment. We're finding that we're rushing through our meals or that you're eating your food in a trance. So that's like, not even being mindful of what you just ate, how it tasted, missing out on that really delicious meal you just prepared for yourself. Feeling persistently irritable, on edge, distracted while engaging in conversation. So you might be face to face with somebody, getting to know them, or having maybe an important conversation about that project at work that's been looming, but you find when you walk away that you actually don't remember their name or didn't remember what you talked about because your mind was completely elsewhere. This is a common one too, and it sounds really scary, but I think more people do it than we're willing to admit. Driving and not remembering how you got from point A to point B. So maybe going to work, the same route that you take every single day, don't really need to think much about it. So your mind wanders. And when you get to work, you don't remember what you heard on the radio, what the weather was like, what types of cars you passed, just kind of living on autopilot. So to be more specific as to how practicing mindfulness can be helpful in managing our stress, mindful.org has provided us with a list of 9 ways this can be helpful. So we are able to become more aware of our thoughts. We are able to identify exactly what those thoughts are that might be causing those feelings of sadness, frustration, anxiety, etc. We don't immediately react to a situation. So this is helpful in what Elana was talking about a minute ago, in that our body does not differentiate between the difference of a tiger chasing us down the street or a looming deadline at work. And so being mindful allows us to kind of react in a measured way according to the size of the stressor. Mindfulness switches on our being mode of mind, being in the moment. You are more aware and sensitive to the needs of your body. You are more aware of the emotions of others. Your level of care and compassion for yourself and others increases. And mindfulness practices reduce activity in the part of your brain called the amygdala, which we discussed earlier. You are better able to focus, and you can change your perspective and attitude about the stress. So when we are stressed, we are often physically present, but emotionally distracted because we are worried about the future. So while doing that, we are often missing out on what's happening in the present moment, which may actually be really helpful in learning some things that might be useful in managing the stress that we're worried about, but we're missing out on that because we aren't present. Next slide. So here's a list of ways that we can actually apply mindfulness to our everyday lives in an effort to cope with stress and minimize the impacts of stress. So the first one listed here, pause and check in with yourself throughout the day. This is simple, but really powerful. Taking a moment every single day, maybe even multiple times a day if needed, to reflect and identify any emotions and physical sensations can help us to become more aware of where these emotions and sensations are coming from. So that can be really useful in, like what Elana was talking about, in terms of connecting with others and how useful that is for the stress cycle. It's really hard to ask for help or communicate with our supports if we don't even know what we're feeling or why we're feeling that way. So it can be really helpful for that reason. The next one listed, living mindfully, which is a skill that takes time, but with practice is completely achievable. So this is just a different way of living than what we've become accustomed to. And that in your everyday life just looks like engaging in daily tasks with focus and intention. Maybe, for example, while you're exercising, eating, walking, driving, washing the dishes, anything that you would do in your everyday life, just doing it while trying to be present. So washing the dishes while experiencing every single aspect of that, how the soap smells, the temperature of the water, what it sounds like, because that's something that we can do without thinking too much about it. We are washing the dishes, but thinking about that to-do list or the project at work or something that happened yesterday that we're feeling anxious about. So it's the practice of just trying to be fully engaged in any activity that you're doing at any given moment. Journaling can be helpful in many different ways, but specifically before bed, it can be helpful in trying to help yourself fall asleep and relax. That's most often when we experience those racing thoughts. So our body is not relaxed, but our mind is going a million miles a minute. So we are thinking about all the things that need to be done tomorrow, what we didn't get done today, what's going to happen. So writing those thoughts down, literally writing the thoughts down on a piece of paper, we are practicing transferring them from our mind to the paper, and maybe even taking it a step further and throwing that piece of paper away. So it's becoming a visual of like throwing those thoughts away for the day. That can help us get to sleep. The practice of observation. So this is observing what is happening around us and within us. It's something that we miss out on when we're living on autopilot. So a really easy strategy that we can use to practice this is taking a moment to observe your surroundings by utilizing what we call the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method. So look around you and name 5 things that you can see, 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. So it's a countdown that engages all 5 of your senses. It's a great way to ground yourself in the present moment if you notice that you're feeling really anxious, maybe even having a panic attack, and can be helpful in that moment. And it is actually something that you can do just about anywhere without anyone noticing. The grocery store, on a walk, at the park, at work, family gathering, wherever. Utilizing meditation and breathing exercises can also be helpful in relaxing your muscles and signaling to your body that it is time to rest. Guided videos for meditation can easily be found on YouTube. We'll discuss that a little bit more in the next slide. And lastly, to improve stress-induced sleep dysfunction, being intentional about trying these relaxing activities, such as a warm bath or yoga right before bed, can be helpful in signaling to your body that it's time to rest. Next slide.
So we wanted to leave you with some resources, and there are lots out there. On the web, there's 3 websites that are all free and have a lot of content. So stress.org, mindful.org, and of course, YouTube. And you can find things like guided visualization or progressive muscle relaxation, or you can find like a 5-minute meditation or a 10-minute meditation, or just listen to some different nature sounds if that's what calms you down. So there's so much content out there. Sometimes it can be a little overwhelming. So there's also a lot of apps. We listed 2 here on the resources that Allison will be sending out as well. We have a sheet on mindfulness, and I believe it does list a number of other apps. But the nice thing, these are some of the more common ones. I've personally had some patients swear by Headspace, like it's saved their lives, and they use it daily. And it has different courses in it, so it's really can teach you how mindfulness, like Cayla said, can seem like, oh, I don't know how to do that, that's overwhelming. But then there's different voices. There's a male voice, there's 2 female voices, I think. So there's lots of different options, and on Headspace there's also like a ton of different types of meditations. Calm is another one that is pretty common. We also want to mention the book Burnout, especially focus on women and stress, which is there's not as much out there as you'd think. And finally, just some mental health resources that we commonly use or give to our patients. Psychologytoday.com is a really great resource for looking for a therapist. You can filter by your insurance, your location, what specific issues you want to address. You can even get a free consultation with a lot of different therapists. And a lot of them have videos. So it's a good way to kind of get to know a therapist before you actually take them on. There's also, and we talked about substance abuse as, sometimes that has become a coping mechanism, especially more so during the pandemic. SAMHSA.gov, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, has a website that you can use to find different resources, including treatment options in your area. And like I said, Allison will be sending out some additional handouts on self-care, mindfulness, sleep, and finding better work-life balance. And now we're on to questions.
Okay, excellent. So it looks like we have about 4 questions in our chat there. If you have a question, please drop it in the chat now, and we will start answering them. So while we're waiting for questions, would you like to talk about how tonight's attendees could make an appointment with you or another person in the behavioral health division?
Sure, we have pretty different roles. So I'm a behavioral health specialist, and I work at the Mylan office. And so I only can see patients that see the physician at Mylan. However, we're in, I don't remember how many offices now, and we're growing all the time. So if you're at one of the primary care offices that has a behavioral health specialist, you can talk to your doctor about getting a referral.
And many of the IHA primary care practices do actually have that connection, yes?
Yes.
Okay,
So I'd say all the ones in the Ann Arbor area, we're now in Brighton, Schoolcraft. Let's see, there's a lot. In the 4 years that I've been there, we've really
expanded.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so let's get started on the questions. So somebody asked, when you talk about compulsive sex, does that include affairs?
That is a good question that I'm not sure can be answered in the kind of short form, but Elana, I would like to know your thoughts on this. Yes, it can include that.
I would think so. That would maybe a reaction to everything that's going on. And
sure.
Okay, so how does this present in the workplace, especially when talking about interactions with coworkers?
Sorry, I just wanted to see if I could read the questions as you were reading them. How does this present in the workplace, especially in interaction with coworkers? I guess I'll try to answer this first, and then Elana, if you want to jump in.
My thought is it's probably how I'm sure that interactions with coworkers can be a big cause of stress for a lot of people.
Sure.
So is that something you guys commonly see?
Yes, absolutely. So I think we experience stress in any type of relationship that we have, right? Whether that's our partner, our coworker, our friends, our family, really any time that we're connecting with people, while on one hand, it can be a really helpful thing that we use for support, it can also be a source of stress. Both things can be true. So, I think having those tools where you can not only learn to cope with your stress outside of work, but then hopefully having somebody within your workplace that is supportive and is in your corner that can help support you in, resolving those conflicts, and finding a way to have a level playing field where everyone can communicate effectively is really important, which, that is definitely something that we work through in therapy with people all the time.
Yeah, I was going to say that's something that comes up a lot in terms of stressors. And I'd say I know we keep talking about the pandemic, but the last couple of years, especially for working moms, it's been particularly stressful, and it feels like there's just a lot of demands and they feel, like I said, overwhelmed. And a lot, there's, sometimes people need to take some breaks, and we talk about that too. Even like, giving yourself a timeout, taking that 15-minute break, walking away, doing some deep breathing exercises, even watching a funny video can help, reset your brain and then go back to that situation. And we talk a lot about like, what do you have control over and what you don't have control over, because you really don't have control over other people, and your coworkers, may treat you a certain way, and you just don't have control over that. So kind of learning how to cope with that.
Okay, excellent. So what if not having time is your stressor? So you feel like you don't have time to exercise, to engage with friends, to do some of those things that will actually help relieve stress. Do you have some advice for those people?
Yeah, I think that certainly you can give people lots of different tools, but then there's also going to be barriers, and totally understand that. Try to work within people's lifestyles and demands, and sometimes there's just not a lot of room for stuff. But even finding a few minutes here and there, mindfulness can literally be something you do for a minute a day. So, or it's something you could add to something you're already doing, like taking a shower or doing the dishes. So we talk about like informal ways to be mindful as well. But I try to work with people with what they have, what's available to them, because a lot of people don't have that time, and really understand that as well.
Yeah, it definitely sometimes requires us to get creative. But we, sometimes upon evaluation, find that, some of the things that we're stressed about, we can try to let go of a little bit, and that we're filling our plate up with unnecessary things. And it's almost always that we find that when our plate is full, the self-care is the first thing to go. It's almost always like, I don't have time for the gym. I don't have time to get the rest I need. And that makes it more difficult to manage the stressors. So yeah, for sure, evaluating within our limitations, what we can do to get creative about finding those moments.
And also, I'd say one thing is not beating yourself up for not doing those things sometimes too. That's really important as well.
Cool. I like that idea of incorporating stress relief into things you're already doing, like throwing on a really great song while you're doing the dishes or something like that can be a huge release of stress. That's a great idea. And then I also like what you said about doing things before bed, because it seems like we all have a minute or two where we sort of zone out before we go to bed. Working it in there. Perfect. So we have a couple people who are asking about the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique. We will definitely share that in the email follow-up. But would you like to just talk through it one more time to give them another round of it?
Sure. So actually, if you Google, I just wanted to see how easy it would be to pull it up on the internet. And if you just Google 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 coping technique for anxiety, it's the first thing that comes up. So you can easily access it that way. And hopefully it becomes one of those things that if you find it helpful, you do it, often enough that it just becomes second nature. But you're doing, and I'll read through this slowly. So if you want to take notes or jot it down. So you would practice, and I would recommend, I guess, trying to, if ideally, maybe like be in a calm environment where you could sit down or relax or be in a comfortable position. But like I said, you can do it anywhere, anytime. So you want to acknowledge 5 things that you see. So using your sight and naming, either saying it out loud or just naming it to yourself, 5 things you can see, 4 things that you can touch or feel, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste.
Okay, perfect. And again, we will send that out on the email that we follow up with. So I know there's some stresses that are sort of unavoidable, like the loss of a loved one or the loss of a job, and those things can be very scary. Do you have a couple of tips for coping with that stress, or kind of like your checklist of what you might want to start doing?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess it'd be different for the different, so for grief, for both things, really giving yourself time and space. But grief, you know, talking about it, finding good, having a good support system, finding a therapist if that's a lot of therapists are specialized in grief. There's also a lot of support systems in the community for grief. But there's no easy way around grief or any loss. I mean, job loss is grief too. So it's just allowing yourself to feel what you need to feel, and and then also some of the other coping mechanisms such as mindfulness, journaling, taking care of yourself are all things that can be helpful during this time.
Yeah, I guess I would also add whether, it is a therapist or a friend or a family member, somebody that you trust and feel like you can confide in and feel safe with is, insulating yourself with those people and really utilizing that support system so that you're not isolating and internalizing all this stress trying to deal with it on your own. Because one, we know that we're not in it alone, and that having the support of others can be really powerful. So I'd say if nothing else, having access to a support system, whether formal or informal, is really important.
Excellent. So there are a couple questions about feeling guilty. So you talked a little bit about that. If you can't incorporate it into your day, but if you have someone who is maybe a caregiver and feels like they have to pack every minute of their day with activity, or they're not being productive, or if you do work in some of these mindfulness techniques or some of these ways to relieve stress, and then you feel guilty that you're using your time for that, can you talk a little bit about what to do if you're feeling guilty for taking that time for yourself?
Yeah, so I always tell people when I'm working with them that it is never wrong and is never a bad thing to take care of yourself. We actually can't be good caregivers to others, good partners, good friends when we are burnt out. And so maybe trying to reframe the way you're thinking about that in terms of, by taking care of myself, I am able to better take care of my partner, my friend, my loved one, etc. So knowing that like these two things go hand in hand, I can't do one without the other. And so making time for myself is not being selfish. I'm actually, being a better version of myself, therefore better for the people around me.
And this, I would also like, just to add, it's also learned behavior, maybe in your parents were constantly going, and you're, uh, um, we all kind of are products of our environment and what was modeled. And just because it feels uncomfortable to take that time out for yourself doesn't mean, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable sometimes is important. So getting used to, like, when you do that thing that, is for you and you feel uncomfortable, just noticing that and noticing that that's okay. That doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It's just a feeling.
Yeah. Feelings are not facts. That's what we say all the
Right.
time.
It's a good hashtag.
Yes.
Okay, so we have an attendee who's talking about being under chronic stress for a really long time and not really knowing what it feels like to not be stressed. So, can you be a person who just is stressed constantly, or can you kind of break out of years of chronic stress?
We're always able to change. I mean, that's the nice thing about the human brain. It's we can learn new things all the time throughout our life. Um, it may be making some big changes. It may be, you know, allowing yourself to be vulnerable, whether that's talking to somebody else about some of these things, asking for help. It really kind of depends on your situation. But I truly believe we can all always change and do better. I mean, we're constantly throughout our lives trying to, um, I see people from 18 to, I don't know what the oldest is, but they're constantly looking for ways to change. So, and working on things. So there's always more we can do. And there's hope.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I like that. There's always hope. So some people have some questions about different symptoms of stress. So obviously, if stress is out of your control completely, you might feel some internal anger, ear ringing. Are those types of things signs of stress or symptoms of it?
Yeah, I guess it can be for sure. I would always encourage people though, if you have a specific concern, to always talk to your doctor about it. We can attribute a lot of these things to stress or chronic stress, but that doesn't always mean that that's what it is. So finding that balance between coping with your stress and practicing self-care, taking care of yourself, and if the concern is lingering, making the decision for yourself of when it's time to take the next step of talking to a doctor.
What I was going to say with our program, since I'm in the primary care office, we will collaborate with each other, and sometimes, it's I get patients because they do have some physical problems that they don't know what's going on, and it could be stress. But sometimes, there's other things going on that need to be addressed. So it's nice to have that collaboration with the doctors as well. And, medicine is not a perfect science. We don't know everything. We're constantly learning.
Yeah.
Definitely. So do you deal with panic attacks? And can you talk a little bit about any coping mechanisms that can be done when a person feels a panic attack coming on? So maybe being claustrophobic or starting to like have shortness of breath. Do you have any suggestions for when you can feel yourself getting into that state?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you can identify um, kind of the physical sensations that happen like right before the panic attack, so then having some coping mechanisms like the 5 4 3 2 1 is a really good one. That's a good grounding technique, or doing some deep breathing, calling somebody and talking to them, having some coping statements. I'll give patients, we'll come up with some different coping statements that they can write down. um, and then they can, take a picture of it and have it on their phone and pull it up when they're starting to have a panic attack. I always say not to fight the panic attack once it starts happening, because then it just prolongs it. So just accepting it, and doing self-talk. Self-talk is a big part of it. Just this is what, this is my anxiety. This is my body reacting to, basically the bucket spilling over. So, and it's not going to hurt me.
Yeah.
And then it ends. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, and even to add on to that, sometimes even just saying out loud or having someone nearby tell you you are safe, to just reinforce that, like, this too shall pass, reminding yourself of that. I've even worked with people who have chronic panic attacks, make a list of things that they can do or have done that have been helpful in the moment, that they can access easily. So kind of like we would call it maybe like a crisis card of sorts. So I'm experiencing a panic attack and I can go down the list and try any number of these things, and it usually works. We even sometimes can try some of those distress tolerance skills. We refer to that as, an overwhelming sensation that is also not going to cause harm, but would be really distracting. For example, like squeezing an ice cube in your hand, can be like something really simple if you have access to an ice cube, of course, or like snapping a rubber band on your wrist, just to kind of like bring yourself back into your body. So
Those are great suggestions. How about, so let's say you've implemented some of these great techniques to reduce stress and to kind of step up your mindfulness, and it works for about 2 or 3 weeks, and then you fall off the wagon and you're kind of back in the same stressful rotation that you were in. Do you have any advice for getting back on schedule, and kind of keeping going? And I assume these breaks or these situations where you fall off the wagon are pretty common.
yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, such is life, right? We're trying to create a new habit, and it's a new way of life in a way that we haven't been living for a long time. So, like, be patient with yourself. Like Ilana was saying a couple minutes ago, do your best not to get trapped in those, shoulda, coulda, woulda thoughts, or, I knew this was going to happen. and just trying to get back on track by, sometimes even just like a alarm on your phone can be something as simple as that can be helpful. If you keep a calendar, like writing a reminder on your calendar every day to be intentional about practicing one of those things.
Okay, it looks like we lost Elana, so hopefully she'll jump back in here. A couple questions about fatigue. This one's specific to compassion fatigue. Do you work with patients who are experiencing that?
Yes, absolutely. So, that similarly to a good stress management strategy specific to that is setting boundaries, which you actually realizing now we didn't get a chance to talk a whole lot about, but making sure that you're setting boundaries and that you're getting time away from other people's stuff, other people's stressors. So for those of us who are maybe in the healthcare profession or taking care of someone else, or just, like a really good friend to people who like to show up for people, it can be really draining. And so making sure that you are being intentional about carving that time out for yourself, and also that you are getting that somewhere else. So, as much as we want to give that to other people, we have to get that in return. So whether that's your own therapist or another friend who has space to give you, making sure you're setting those boundaries and finding a balance that works for you.
Yeah, I'm sure that could even include watching the news these days. It's like that can really make my compassion stress overflow. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
making sure that you're setting boundaries with yourself about how much time you're spending reading the news, listening to the news, that type of thing, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Can you talk a little bit about the link between stress and depression? Stress and depression can both cause physical symptoms, as can anxiety. Is there a way to tell when you're experiencing stress versus depression versus anxiety?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And sometimes it can be pretty difficult to determine the difference. I think that therapy is a really good tool for that, to kind of, sort through all of that and evaluate where these things are coming from. But yeah, I mean, when we're experiencing chronic stress and things that are really difficult to deal with, over time, we can start to feel hopeless, like things aren't going to get better, leading to our mood feeling depressed, sadness. And it can lead to a depressive episode for sure. And anxiety and stress, when Elana and I were creating this presentation, we kind of went back and forth about how much we wanted to use the word anxiety, because they are in a lot of ways interchangeable, right? Anxiety is in its nature, worry about the future, fear about the future. So like what's going to happen, what might happen. And stress is that also, things that I'm worried about, this thing coming up, or this thing that I have to do a couple of days from now or a month from now. And, we worry about it. We feel nervous, irritable, and anxious, on edge, all of the things. So they do mirror each other a lot. But making sure that you're getting professional help to sort through that and address those things appropriately can be really helpful.
Perfect. And there are a few questions about different types of care people are seeking. So whether it's a therapist who might accept Medicare, or someone who might deal with uh, extensive childhood trauma, through the links that you provided, will everyone be able to locate the right person for them, for their specific condition?
Yeah. Psychology Today, I would say, is the most helpful resource for that. You can really narrow your search to tailored to what it is that you need. I will say that I've gotten some feedback from a lot of different people since the pandemic started, that there are a lot of therapists are on wait lists, just because of, the pandemic really made a lot of, thankfully brought a lot of this to the surface so that people could get the help they need and take that first step. But, there's maybe not enough of us to support the need right now. So you might find that there are wait lists, but you should be able to find somebody even if you have to wait a little while. And the question about Medicaid, I guess I did want to go back to that, because Alana's program is a bit different than mine in the way that I do not work in a primary care office. So I work in a separate clinic that is psychiatry and counseling. So we actually work with resident psychiatrists who are supervised by attending psychiatrists. And so we work in conjunction with them rather than the PCP. But we do, some of the therapists, including myself in that office, we take Medicare. So I would I can give you the phone number if that's helpful. You can give you the phone number to our clinic, and you can call anytime and talk to our intake coordinators, and they can take your insurance information and let you know if we can get you on the schedule. So yeah, listen, I don't know if I
Okay.
should write
Yeah.
the phone number somewhere or
I will share it definitely in the follow-up email. So look for that in your inbox, but you can also find the contact information on ihcares.com. So I will share all of those links. And okay, let's see. We just had a couple more questions, and I actually got a text from Elana. It sounds like she lost power. So talk about a stressor
there. Oh, yeah.
in the middle of your presentation. So we talked a little bit about music. I think you guys talked a little bit about pets. Are those things good resources for relieving stress? And are there maybe a few more that you can think of?
Yeah. I mean, it's different for everybody. It's kind of a process of evaluation based on your preferences and things like that, because we certainly wouldn't want to, introduce a pet if that's going to cause more stress in terms of financial stressors, or maybe you just don't have time to take care of a pet, of course. So everyone has to evaluate it based on their situation, but certainly pets, music, poetry, if you have something that you like to do, like going to the movies or watching a movie, or if there's a television show or a podcast or anything that can be, a helpful distraction, so that you can shift your focus away from those stressors momentarily. Anything that you find like that. A lot of people that I see in my practice crochet, that's a really common one, calming and soothing activity, painting, drawing. Yeah.
Yeah, and this kind of leads into our next question where, excuse me, if you have like one person you always call on, or you feel comfortable talking to, and you are worried that maybe you are giving them a little bit of compassion fatigue by always calling them. Yeah, it sounds like maybe learning to do some of those things, or joining a crochet circle, or finding some friends that do something common might be a good way to meet some new people. In addition to, of course, seeking out therapy. Is there anything else you could think of?
Well, I hear that a lot, that we feel like we are burdening others when we feel like we need support. And so I always suggest that, rather than just assuming that somebody doesn't have the space to support you, maybe you can say something like, I'm really feeling overwhelmed right now. Do you have space to talk about that with me? And let them tell you whether or not they do, right? Like, let them trust that they will set a boundary with you if they need to. Otherwise, I want to discourage people from just assuming that people in their lives can't support them, because that is not necessarily the case. And we tend to, internalize the stressors if we feel like those people can't take that on. So let them tell you. And yeah, certainly finding supports in other ways. So maybe not even always just talking about the stressors, but finding connections that are completely unrelated. So yeah, crocheting group, a support group, reading club, book club, anything like that.
Okay, perfect. I think that wraps up the majority of our questions. So thank you so much, Cayla, and thank you to Elana, who dropped off because she lost power. We appreciate it. I'm glad she was able to make it through the presentation. So again, look for an email in the next few days. It'll have lots of great resources, as well as a recording of this presentation and the slideshow that Cayla and Elana presented. So thank you so much, everyone. We really appreciate you being part of our April Wednesday Wellness. And be well, and we'll see you in May. Thank you so much, Cayla.
So thank you. Bye.
Bye.